Eager to Pleasers, welcome back to another episode of the Eager to Please podcast. Have you ever felt stuck and wondered if something was missing from your life? Have you ever longed for more emotional intimacy with your partner? Well, joining us today to answer these questions and more, and to talk about her new book coming out in February 2026 called The Cost of Quiet, is couples therapist and relationship expert Colette Fehr. Not only is she certified in emotionally focused therapy, she has lived through her own personal story of divorce and what it's like to pick yourself back up, to find meaningful connections and authentic relationships. And man, do I wish I knew about you when I was going through my own midlife crisis and divorce journey. So welcome, Colette. So glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. And I too wish I had had me and my book when I was going through my divorce, which is why I wrote it.
Exactly. Well, I'm excited to dig into that. But first, just wanted to give a shout out to Olivia from Fresh Starts Registry, who connected us to begin with, because I feel like our stories are strikingly similar. We both grew up in households where conflict was the norm. So when we did get married, we kind of gravitated towards that partner who calmed us down and was more level-headed. We gave up our careers at one point to be a stay-at-home parent and fell into this charmed life, so to speak, where we reached all the cliched milestones, healthy and beautiful kids, the white picket fence, nice vacations, and everything on paper looked like it was amazing. And then creeps in the silent resentment that kept building because somehow we managed to lose ourselves along the way and didn't know how to communicate why we had become so frustrated. And something that you wrote that I had read that I truly stand behind, it was not necessarily the issues themselves that ruined our relationship, but it was the disconnection that develops between us because neither one of us knew how to talk through it. So I would love it if we could start there by having you share, a bit about yourself and how you got into making it your life's mission to help others find greater joy and connection in their relationships.
Yes. Oh my gosh. It's, hearing you say you relate to it. And this is a big part of what inspired the book is doing this work as a couples therapist. And I also work with individual adults going through relationship challenges and divorce. I would hear the same thing over and over from so many women in particular. Not that there aren't men who go through this too, but a lot of women saying the same thing that I had lived and recognizing that somewhere along the way, it starts because you don't get a good response when you do try to say something. And there's so many myths we have that I'm certainly happy to get into about how it should work in terms of our partner knowing what we need and feeling like we're too needy or too much, especially if we don't get a good response back. And so we just start to slowly lose our voices in the relationship because it feels like nothing works. We don't know how to say it. We don't get through, or we get these very confusing messages, which I did, that somehow I was being too emotional or too needy or irrational. And, you really doubt yourself, especially if you are a very deeply feeling, sensitive, relational person. Relationships have always been important to me. I've always been a big feeler. And so if my partner's giving me feedback, I'm taking that feedback and trying to filter it. I'm not just dismissing it. So it's very confusing. But in my case, just like you said, going back a little bit, when I was growing up, I had a very idyllic early childhood. I was an only child till I was almost 10. My parents had my brother when I was 9.5. And it was just my parents and me. And life was really very stable, very peaceful. I grew up in a Catholic family in New York. I went to all girls Catholic school. Nobody got divorced. I didn't know one single friend who had divorced parents. Nobody in my family had ever gotten divorced. And for the first 10, 11 years of my life, my parents got along really well. I felt very safe in my home. And I was always I marched to kind of my own beat. I was always very kind of dramatic and imaginative and creating characters and acting them out. And my mom didn't, just to give you a flavor for how accepting my parents were. I wanted to have long hair and my mom wouldn't let me. So I wore stockings, my ballet tights on my head because I was like, I'm having long hair, whether you let me or not. And they let me wear my long hair like out in public. And there's all these family photos where I have pink tights on my head. I mean, just weird stuff. So, but good stuff. My parents encouraged me to be who I was. And I think this part is important. My parents, even my father, I had a great relationship with my dad and still do. And they were both very encouraging of me to have an opinion, to be assertive, to be a strong female. So I grow up with this environment, but then in my teen years, really starting at about 11, my parents' marriage started to crumble shortly after the birth of my brother. And all of a sudden there was a lot of fighting. Now, this is interestingly from a psychological perspective. My mom still to this day, there's something in her, I feel like, where she can't quite hear my experience. Like, I think it upsets her to think that I might have been put through what I felt that I was put through. She's like, there wasn't that much fighting, but there was. That's my recollection. And suddenly I felt scared. There was so much conflict. It wasn't handled well. We didn't focus as much back then as a society on thinking about how children experience divorce. Yeah. This would have been, the mid 80s. And I didn't know anybody else going through it. I'd go to my friends' parents' houses and they were all so genteel. And, I grew up in a suburb of New York, right outside of Manhattan and right on the border of Connecticut. So I went to school in Greenwich, Connecticut. And all I just saw was these very polished people who never seemed to let a thing ruffle their feathers. And my home, I'd go home and have a stomachache because everybody was screaming. So the lesson I learned is conflict is really, really bad. And I'm going to grow up and have a marriage that is so happy and easy and light and the perfect romantic ideal. And when I got to college on the first day of school, my sophomore year, I met a man who had grown up in the South. I love his family so much, so I'm not criticizing them, but they were very conflict avoidant. Generationally, I think this is very normal. And also being Southern, everything is like, bless her heart. And, right. We're never upset about anything. And if we are, we just don't talk about it. Right. Well, I thought that was nirvana. I'm like, this is great. He had a very steady demeanor. He was never, as I'm emotional and easily excitable. I mean, I'm Italian and Irish. It's like a fiery combination.
Yes, all the things.
Yes, all the things. If I'm upset, you're going to know from a mile away from the look on my face, but I'm also very quick to recover and be fine. I'm not a grudge holder. But he just nothing ever rocked the boat with him. In fact, when I met him, he told a story about how in high school he'd been traveling with friends and they were staying in some home that went on fire and everybody ran and one guy's girlfriend was still in the house and he, my ex-husband, was the one who ran back in the house and saved that girl. Wow. Right? How romantic. And like, this is the kind of calm, steady, brave person that I thought, wow, this feels so good to my nervous system. This man's going to keep me safe. And then, of course, and I'm not blaming him, we both played a role, but for years, we dated all through college. We got married right out of college. We had the big fancy country club wedding. We never argued ever. But already looking back, the seeds were there where I was trying to be a little bit of what Gillian Flynn called the cool girl in her famous book, Gone Girl. And the cool girl is, the one who's never mad about anything. She'll drink beers with the boys. She wants to have sex, but she, can go to the baseball game. She's never mad. She's like, you do you, right? She's not a difficult woman. So I had already begun to see that I get love when I'm easy. and a lot of people pleasing began. And the reason I give all this context is that I just was raised very much like, you know, my mom's a lawyer. My dad's a doctor. They're both very smart, strong people. So they were kind of both a little alpha. But as a result, my dad was like, you know, always speak up for yourself and what you have to say is valuable and you're intelligent. And I see this in my office, all these smart women running companies. These are not women who are quiet, but then they can lose themselves in the relationship because especially as women, we're such helpers and we're sort of taught to put our needs after our husband, after our children, after our coworkers, right? That's noble. And if we're not careful, we lose ourselves in the process. And this is what happened to me. I started to realize that as I got older, I had needs for emotional connection. I wanted intimacy, and that was not available in the relationship. So when I try to say, hey, this bothers me, or this hurts my feelings, or I want to feel more connected, I would get very dismissive messages. And rather than continue to what felt like push my husband away or create arguments I didn't know how to navigate, I just stopped trying to say anything. And slowly the resentment built until it got to a place where we were so detached and disconnected. I ended up divorced with a nearly 2-year-old and 4-year-old child.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I know that's a lot, but that, believe it or not, is like very much the distilled summary. But this is why I realized once I became a couples therapist as a result of my divorce, that this is a very, very common thing. And when I say the cost of quiet, first of all, quiet is a euphemism for conflict avoidance because it doesn't always sound so silent. And I'm happy to get into that, the top 10 ways that we end up avoiding and don't realizing it. Yeah. But also that the cost, number one, is that you slowly quiet quit your relationship. You foreclose on the possibility of connection and intimacy. But the greatest cost, that is really why I wrote the book, is that we as women destroy our inner well-being when we don't speak up for our truth and advocate for ourselves. And you feel in your body that when you express your feelings and needs, it feels so good. This is what we're designed to do as people. And we can't lose that no matter how our partners respond.
Absolutely. Well, you touched on something a little bit ago, how you got to be a therapist to begin with. Do you believe in love languages and being able to understand your partner's love language? Because I don't know, I kind of sit on the fence about this. I do feel like it's important to know how your partner receives information and likes to be appreciated, because this was something that I learned might have been helpful had I looked into this when I was married or, pre the divorce, because we handle and process information way differently. And how I wanted to be respected and shown appreciation was not the way he was communicating to me. And I just got so frustrated because I'm like, you're not listening to me. You're not hearing what I need. And it was like this vicious cycle of you don't care because you're not listening to what I'm telling you that I need. So I'm curious your take on that.
Yeah, it's a great question because there's been a backlash to the whole love language thing from the therapeutic community in the sense that it's not empirically validated. There's no scientific data to suggest that this is true. Gary Chapman came up with it and that's great, but there's nothing that says out there that we can look to in terms of numbers or qualitative or quantitative data. However, to your point, I agree with you. I don't think just because it isn't research backed that we throw the baby out with the bathwater. What I don't think is that this is the watershed that people may think, or that if you know your partner's love language and they know yours, you're good. There's so much more to it. Totally. And and I think your ability to handle conflict is really the biggest thing that's going to make or break your relationship, truly. And your willingness not to avoid. But I think the love language comes in very usefully in exactly what you mentioned, that knowing what makes your partner feel seen and heard, to use the, millennial Gen Z language of the day, appreciated, because we
Right.
know from, right, seen and heard. And we do want to feel seen and heard. We know from Dr. John Gottman's research, and he is the king of relationship research, and that he's done 40 plus
Wow.
years of longitudinal research on couples. So we have real hard data that we need, ideally, 20 kind of positives and appreciations for every one negative to feel good in our relationship.
Wow.
Yeah, and a minimum of 5. So if we as human beings, as relational beings, if we're not getting feedback that says our partner cares about us, they value us, they appreciate us, they care about how we want to be loved, it's going to be a problem. And I do think, though, this is my personal take, and other therapists have said this too, that we all need probably a little bit of all of the love languages. And it tends to be the thing we're not getting that we're like, this is my love language, right? So, mine, I've taken the test, is physical touch and words of affirmation. But I also care about quality time. I also love acts of service. Gifts are lovely. They're probably lowest on my list because I'm just not really into like material things. And there's nothing wrong with being into those things. But I'm going to feel the most loved if you come, like, hold my hand, put your arm around me, touch me, tell me, oh, I was so proud of you when you did that thing the other day. And honestly, you could probably ignore me most of the rest of the week. And if I get that, I'm going to feel pretty good.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm married to someone who words don't really matter to him. It's like physical touch, which is most guys, and quality time. So I think there's a place for it. But I think if you don't know how to navigate these other important areas, you can really get in trouble.
Yeah.
And the whole thing with avoidance and conflict avoidance is that a lot of people, and you may see this in your community too, I certainly had it. They have what I call a surface marriage. You have the good life. You're happy. As long as you stay busy and you're doing things with your friends, you're good. But then when you hit a hard spot, you don't have the tools and the infrastructure to handle it. And this is why I wrote this book. I want to give people, and I do give, an actual process for how to communicate this way.
I love it. Well, that's a perfect segue, because that was going to be my next question. If we could backtrack a second just to talk about your book, The Cost of Quiet. And we know why now you wrote it and what inspired you to write it. But I'm curious, what are some nuggets that we're going to take away from it?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I love to talk about this, of course.
Good.
Because I put so much work into this book, and I really put what I learned personally, but also I've been doing couples therapy for almost 14 years. It's its own animal. I just want to shout out something very important to the listener before I answer your question, which is that wherever you live, if you're looking to go to couples therapy, we still have laws where you have to see somebody in your state unless you're working with a coach. But for couples therapy, it is so important to look for a couples therapist who is specifically trained in couples therapy. Any practitioner can see you as a couple, and some will do it, and it creates a lot of damage. It is a completely different animal from individual therapy. So do your homework. When you call people, ask them, have you seen a lot of couples? Look and see if they're certified in a therapy model. Doesn't have to be emotionally focused, although that is the gold standard. But so I just want to say that because it's really important. And I didn't have a good marriage counselor in my first marriage who was not properly trained to see couples, which I didn't know. And she did more harm than good. Okay. So that said,
thank you for that.
Yes. So in the book, I try to give people really the best of what I've learned, very distilled. And first, I really identify the problem. Why do we avoid conflict so much? Because this isn't about an avoidant attachment style, although I do address attachment styles and how that plays into this in the book. Avoidant behavior, avoiding conflict, the top 10 ways you avoid conflict, and I can highlight a few. Those things happen because we are wired, we know from attachment science, to bond. We're pro-social herd animals. We're relational beings. And as adults, we really need people just as much as we do as kids. The only difference is that if someone abandons us, we won't die. We'll feel like we're going to die, but we don't die where a child will. But we still need close, bonded, safe, reliable, consistent others in our life that we can turn to in times of distress for comfort and support, that we can be ourselves with and feel loved and accepted. So these are real biological needs. So I explain that, why we're that way, that this is why our needs are normal. There's no such thing as being too needy or, needing your partner is a normal thing. And we have to be our first line of support, but wanting support and reassurance from them is natural. Mm-hmm. And because of all of this is why conflict gets so scary. Anything, even really little, a look of tension on your partner's face, a slightly elevated tone of voice, a raised eyebrow is cued by our body as danger. It feels like a threat to our attachment bond. And we know that we need our attachment bonds to survive and thrive. So deep down in our reptilian brain and our limbic system, we experience little moments of conflict or anticipation of conflict as life or death, even though it isn't quite that. That's how we experience it. And we tend to go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And fawn, of course, is like an appeasing. Yeah, like the people pleasing, the explaining, the tension's building. So let me just do whatever I have to do, even at the expense of my message, just to make things feel okay again. So these are very natural human responses. And I give a lot of scientific evidence for why we react the way we do. And of course, part of it is conflict feels scary and uncomfortable. And as human beings, we're designed to avoid anything that feels scary and uncomfortable.
Right.
And then I get into, okay, yes, that's all normal. And the primary task of emotional maturity is to realize that we have wise, loving adult selves within that I call the sage self. We didn't have that part of ourselves developmentally as children. We're very much shaped by our childhood. And I give a lot of information about family of origin modeling, attachment styles, and how this impacts the way we show up around conflict. But then as adults, we really have to learn how to grow and evolve beyond the sphere of conflict and to realize that actually we're not going to die. It's not as scary as it seems. And the only way to do that really is to take small risks, to put yourself out there, to say, hey, like actually something bothered me. It's on my mind. I'd really like to talk to you about it. And as we do that, the paradox of fear is that the more we do that thing that feels so scary, the easier it becomes. Most of the time, the anticipation of expressing yourself in conflict is far worse than the thing itself, right. And then I give a whole method in the book called self-connected communication that I'm happy to share more about if you want me to, but a process for really connecting to yourself, really taking care of your inner child, getting very clear on what you feel and need because you have the answers. You just don't think you do. And then really distilling it. I give a tool called the self-connected communication blueprint where I ask you specific questions that help you write everything out. So by the time you go to your partner, you're very, very prepared. And we have to prepare before we share. We have to emotionally regulate, which I show you how to do. We have to get very clear on what we feel and need. And then we have to go to our partner with very clear vulnerability, assertive language, because it is very hard to hear feedback and we want to give ourselves the best chance possible to be heard. So I give readers exactly how to do this, exactly what I help people do in therapy. So you have the best chance possible that your partner can hear you. And what we know is that when you're really vulnerable, I see it in my office all the time. If I help people get to the vulnerable layer below all the surface reactivity, they're shocked. They know the answers. They do know what they feel. They do know what they need. They don't think they do. And then they're able to express it in a way that, vulnerability invites vulnerability. 95% of the time, when you really say it in this vulnerable way, your partner is responsive. And finally, I give you what to do if you get bad responses from your partner, which does also happen.
Yes, I'm sure. Well, that was going to be my next question is,
Yeah.
okay, so you've gotten up the courage, and maybe you've even given yourself a day or two to, get your emotions in check, because that was my biggest thing. I am very reactive, or I was very reactive. It's taken me a lot of work to kind of like,
me too.
Okay, rein it in, because I'm also Italian and Catholic. So I have that combination. Okay. And it's like, okay, not everything is like an urgent situation, but right. It is valid to you because that's how you're feeling. But I would relay it as almost like attacking. And so then he would shut down because I didn't know how to put it in a way that's like, okay, this isn't to attack your character, but it's how I'm feeling and maybe what I need you to do to step up to the plate. And so how do you navigate that if your partner is not responsive or willing to hear your things and is just, reacting to your reaction?
Yep. Yeah. No. And this is so often the case, right? Maybe our partners haven't done the work. Feedback is so hard to receive. Sometimes you say it perfectly and your partner still takes it as an attack on their character. I mean, just to segue for a second, what you described is the most common pattern, is that it comes out reactively. The other person shuts down. Females tend to be what we call pursuers in therapy, and men are withdrawers. So it comes out, and this is a big part also of why I wrote the book, is that women will say to me, well, I did say what I felt, but they said it in a way that was actually critical, blaming, attacking, or they don't even think they're being critical. Our interpretations and assumptions about our partner aren't our feelings. That's our thought. That's our meaning making. That's our narrative. So I really teach this in the book too, that first, you're going to get very clear on what you feel because your feelings point you to your needs, and it's regulating to name your actual specific emotions. There's almost always fear beneath the surface frustration. So I guide people how to recognize the emotions at the top: frustration, irritation, annoyance, anger. There's usually some of that going on. And then the deeper, what we call in therapy, primary emotions, almost always some form of at least relational fear that you don't love me. You don't care about my needs. I'm going to lose you if I speak up. You don't value me. I'm not good enough for you. There's such core universal themes. And so we find emotions that go with that, like fear, shame, hurt, disappointment, loneliness. So we want to be able to name those two. And then we name our story rather than blaming and accusing. We say, the meaning I made of this, or the story in my mind, is that you just don't care about my feelings. That's very different from saying, you know what? You don't care. I'm so sick of you. I'm not even going to say anything anymore because you just don't give a shit about me. So, if you're saying it that way with I language and self-focus, like, hey, the other day, I'm making this up. I said something to you and you didn't respond. This is my husband. Half the time I joke with him. He's German. He's a numbers guy. Shows no emotion. I'm like, you could win the lottery or someone you love died, and I wouldn't see any difference on the outside. I wouldn't even know. So let's just say the difference between, just to illustrate this, and then I'll get into the bad response, that I say to my husband, the other day I shared something with you and you walked out of the room without saying anything. So first I'm describing the behavior neutrally, right? I'm not being like, you always do that. Like, what's wrong with you? I do think it's weird, right? But I used to say things like, why would you just walk out of the room and not answer me? That's so weird. I would never do that to somebody, right? That's blaming. It's criticism. All of a sudden, his alarm bell is going to go off. Wow, she's never happy with me. Here we go again. What did I do this time? Right? Maybe he didn't even hear me. So much is a misunderstanding, and we can clear it up if we use this approach. So let's say I say, the other day you walked out of the room, you didn't respond. I felt confused, hurt, maybe a little disappointed. And the story in my mind, or the meaning I made of it, is that you just weren't that interested in what I had to say. It actually kind of hurt me. And next time, could you like lean in if I'm sharing something with you and give me a response? That would make me feel less lonely. I mean, this is just a very quick example. So that gives him a really good chance of hearing me instead of, I'm so fed up. You never listen. You're so weird. You don't say anything. What's wrong with you? Why don't you talk? Because I do think it's weird, right? But I'm giving him my inner world and I'm giving him a chance to relate to my inner world and to repair by saying, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that you felt that way. I had no idea. I actually didn't even hear you. Or, you know what, Colette, I was so distracted with something. I'm sorry. I probably did do that to you and didn't even realize. And then reassure me. Of course, I care about what you have to say. Tell me now. I'd really like to hear. Okay. So let's say I say it like that and I'm married to someone who is very defensive and just can't hear it no matter how nicely I worded it and goes, God, here we go again. I walked out of the room and that's a big deal. You have something to say about everything. It's so annoying. Enough. I'm stressed at work. I don't want to talk about this. And they walk into the other room and ignore you for 2 days. Wow, that sucks. So the first thing is, and that's going to happen. Yeah. And even in a healthy marriage or relationship, you're going to get a bad response some portion of the time because we're human. Mm-hmm. And so the difference is, first of all, the bad responses, I call them the bad communication report card of responses, which is 3 D's and an F: defensiveness, dismissiveness, distancing, and fixing. And those are the top things that we get when we try to share that don't feel good, right? You're failing if you're doing those things, and they're human. No one wants that. So if we get that, then through self-connected communication, because we've done work on the front end to connect to our inner child, our vulnerability, our wise adult self, we're really developing through this process and this model a relationship with parts of ourself. We are then going to be able to go, you know what? Ouch, that really hurt, and validate ourselves that did not feel good, and then take care of ourselves to say, you know what? Good for you, Colette. You spoke up. It feels good that you put your truth out there and your partner wasn't able to receive you. And while that's hurtful and disappointing, I can then talk to myself inside with self-compassion and say, you did a good thing there. Your needs do matter. You said it really clearly. That was totally valid. And he or she or they couldn't be there for you in this moment. And we can circle back to it another time and say, hey, I tried to share something with you. I made a real effort to say it as kindly as possible, and it wasn't received. That really hurt my feelings. Could we try again? Could you help me understand why that was so hard for you? Can we explore it? You can make those kind of efforts talking about the communication itself and why it didn't work. But there are going to be cases where if you do your side of the street and you're really showing up clearly and vulnerably and communicating, and no matter what you do, you can never get a good response, and you're really using this method, then I think we have to say to ourselves, okay, perhaps this is the limit of what this relationship can actually offer. And then this is information, and you can make choices with that information. Can I accept this? Or is this something that I'm not willing to live with? And maybe I need to think about not being in the relationship anymore. So I know that's a very long answer, but it's a very big topic.
It really is. But I love how you just ended it with the self-compassion. That's something I feel like a lot of women struggle with, myself included, is being able to say okay, you did a good enough job, or, as clearly as you could, or, you made the effort. And instead of being hard on yourself, well, what else do I need to do? Or how is this my problem now? Or how do I take this on? Or how do I fix it? Or, that was me, like the fixer, the eager to pleaser, which is the whole reason for this podcast. It's like, how can you show yourself some self-compassion to be like, okay, that was a good enough job. And if they can't come meet you in the middle, then what? So yes, I love that.
And, the self-compassion piece is so key. You may have read this or talked about it on the podcast, but the work of Kristen Neff from about 10 plus, maybe 15 years ago now. She's the psychologist who actually really researched self-compassion and put it on the map. And her work is so foundational. It's on her website. Her book is great, Self-Compassion. It really is a game changer because especially as like high achieving type A women, but all of us women, we can be so hard on ourselves. Our inner voice is so harsh, or, well, that sucked. Maybe you could have done a better job, or what I did wasn't good enough. And instead we're validating ourselves. And then we're also saying, you know what, that hurt. And like, that doesn't feel good, and giving ourselves that love and care that we would give our child or our best friend. We've got to give that to us. And it is a game changer.
It is. So part of me thinks maybe it comes with age and maturity that happens. I have an older sister who kind of went through a divorce roughly around the same time that I did. So we were kind of navigating these waters together, which, sucked, but was also good that we had each other to kind of be like, well, what did you learn? And what did you learn? And so aside from your book, and the whole reason why I said that is because I feel like we both had a midlife crisis, in our midlife life. And aside from your book, you also have a TEDx talk and a podcast called Insights from the Couch that you host with your best friend, Laura, talking about midlife things. What kind of topics you feel you gravitate towards in that podcast that you love to talk about and share, because, you're probably in the same, phase of life roughly that the two of us are in. So it's interesting to me listening to other women who have been where I was just a couple years ago.
Yeah. And, it really ties in even to this stuff, because I will see all these women who are older, who are still hard on themselves, who are still not communicating, even in their 60s. And it takes such a toll on our physical health. It destroys our mental health. I describe in the book the cave of resentment. So I just want to say this whole thing about speaking up, it's not just in a romantic relationship, it's across the board. And I think one really important point that we bring into the podcast and the book is that when you are developing at midlife, often this is a place of tremendous growth. We're more comfortable in our skin. And let's say this is maybe for some of us the first time we're really using our voices. With assertive communication, we want to be vulnerable and clear. But I think the piece that gets lost is being kind, and that we tend to either be really reactive and pissed off and upset, or we say nothing. So let's come at midlife to the middle and recognize that being assertive is, like you said, getting your feelings, have your feelings, but getting regulated enough that you can say it calmly and that you can still be kind and diplomatic. So this is a big part that we also talk about in the podcast. And then we talk about all the issues. So my best friend, Laura, is also a therapist. She works primarily with individuals. She doesn't see couples. And I work with everyone, but I specialize in couples. So we started this podcast. She's in her late 40s. I'm 52. We're there, and we know divorce, the gray divorce. I have done more media segments on the gray divorce than almost anything. It is on the rise. Divorce numbers have dropped since the 80s, but the gray divorce is on the rise, and that's really a midlife divorce. And the vast majority of them are initiated by women. And in part, this quiet quitting of a relationship is part of the phenomenon. So, if we're going to get a divorce, that's fine. Not every relationship's meant to work out. Some people have been unhappy a long time. You got one life to live, but let's make sure we're being really intentional about that and everything we do in life. So we focus a lot on empowering women. We cover perimenopause and menopause. We'll have doctors on. We've had Dr. Vonda Wright, Dr. Kelly Casperson, people who are big voices in the menopause space. I learned a lot from all of that about what really makes sense with HRT and what doesn't. We cover GLP-1s, what the real truth is there, how to make that safe and effective, like what we need to know. And then, of course, we address the mental health components, not just relationships, anxiety, the stress on parents today for college admissions, for example. We have an episode about that coming out. And really just all the little things, like what we've let go of caring about, what we care about, how to address, family cutoffs. Do you need a cutoff? All that kind of stuff, boundaries. So there's really career changes. There's really nothing we don't cover. And we try to bring on a mix of guests and then episodes where we just talk about what we see in therapy. And we're very raw and real, to the point where sometimes my husband's like, did you have to get into that the other day?
Yes, you did. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, I love it. That's one of the things I do admire about your work. When I was doing some research too, and Olivia introduced us, is that you have lived some life, and you focus on that what I think is the sweet spot of our lives, because in our 20s, we don't really know who we are. We're still trying to figure it out. Our 30s, I think we're still gaining footing. And then in our 40s into the 50s, we're like, okay, we're old enough now that we say we've put some miles on our bodies, but we're still young enough to crave that adventure. And so I know you have daughters. I have daughters. What are some things that you have shared with them that you've learned, just so I can tuck it, because mine are teenagers still, so they're not quite old enough to be, young adults, but some nuggets that you've shared with them of what I wish I would have known when I was your age, because that'll just set you up for some success.
You're so right. So my daughters are 22, my younger one, and my older one's about to turn 25. And I'm trying to get them both to read my book, because I really wish I had even had a clue about some of this earlier in my life and approached my relationships differently. Even just dating and looking for a partner. And again, even in how you talk to your friends. So you know how kids can be. Anything I say, they're like, don't therapize me. My older one does not want to hear really anything. And so she's just not that receptive. My younger one tells me everything. We really talk about stuff. She's open and receptive. And, my older one, I think it gives her anxiety. There's certain things she doesn't want to talk about because they're stressing her out. But what I really do, my message really is about knowing your self-worth, really picking people as partners, and also that it's okay to mess up. You're going to have some relationships that are what the kids call toxic, maybe even, or guys who are not available, because there's a lot of that. But really pay attention to yourself as you navigate these things. Don't let anyone take away from you knowing that you are valuable and worthy by virtue of breathing. You can always come to me with anything, even if you killed somebody. Not that I expect this to happen.
Yes,
I am your mom. I am here for you. I am in your corner. My love for you is not tied to what you achieve, what you accomplish, where you go to school, what your job is. I don't care. I don't care if you are working a minimum wage job the rest of your life, if you're happy and can provide for yourself. I don't care who your partner is, as long as my daughters are both heterosexual, as long as he treats you well. Mm-hmm. I really want them to feel that sense of just love and acceptance, and to look for that in their relationships, and really truly, same message as my book. Never let your voice be silenced. Stand up for yourself, for what you think, for what you believe, even if other people don't like it. Because if we're all doing that, and we're doing that respectfully, we're going to have a much more connected society, much more tolerant society. And we're not there yet, but let's live our own lives that way.
Absolutely. I love all of that. So good. So good. All right. What are some secrets from the therapist, I think, as you call them, last words of wisdom before I let you get out of here, that you would like to share that we haven't already talked about that might be useful?
Okay. So, we've kind of touched on it, but from a different angle. It's just realizing that most of what people do, how they treat you, how they respond to you, it's really not about you. It's really not. It's about them. So many people, most of us, have been damaged in some way. We've been hurt, whether you want to call it trauma, even if you've had a relatively good life. if you're over the age of 40 in particular, you probably weren't attuned to much emotionally as a kid because we just weren't talking about that or paying attention to it. So know that when you get responses from people or people do things that hurt you, try to really remember that it's not as personal as it feels, and that the way you talk to yourself, the way you validate yourself and soothe yourself is the most important thing. And you can start to let go of trying to manage other people's reactions. Get them to see your job is to take care of you. Focus on that. Know what you need. Know what you feel. Advocate for it. Let go of all the rest. You're not responsible for other people's emotions. You're not responsible for how they receive you. You're responsible for saying it kindly and clearly and being true to yourself. And the rest you just got to let go of.
Yes, it's such a great reminder, but so hard to do sometimes. So
it is. It is. And that's why it feels personal, right? Like, let's not pretend it doesn't. I'm very sensitive. If somebody's mean to me, it's going to hurt. And I can tend to myself and say that hurts. And I know it's not really about me, even though it feels painful. So don't ever talk yourself out of your feelings. They're all valid and worth paying attention to.
Absolutely. I am so excited for February of 2026 for your book to come out, The Cost of Quiet. Where can our listeners find you and follow you and pre-save this book that you're putting out next year?
Thank you so much for asking. So it would be great to pre-order the book. Pre-orders are so important to authors, even though it doesn't come till February 3rd. On my website, ColetteJaneFehr.com, which is ColetteJaneFehr. And I'm sure it'll be in the show notes and stuff.
Absolutely. I will link everything. Yes, for sure.
Thank you. So if you go there, though, right now, I'm giving lots of giveaways. I have a Cost of Quiet toolkit that gives you scripts and tools you can use right away to make it really simple to communicate effectively. If you buy more than one book, I have a digital course that I normally charge for that I'm giving for free that goes with the book that will really, really help you put this into practice, and all kinds of other freebies, including a big VIP launch party we're doing that you can buy tickets for through books.
Sweet.
So really consider buying a copy of the book, or 2 or 3 for your friends early, and take advantage of all these great bonuses. And then I'm very active on Instagram, also on TikTok, even though I don't really know how to use TikTok, but both of them are at Colette Jane Fehr. And then on Substack, I do write a weekly newsletter where I give a lot of actionable advice and help for you, for your relationships, not just romantic ones. It's called Secrets from a Therapist, and you can find me there. And then, of course, I have 2 podcasts, Insights from the Couch, Real Talk for Women at Midlife, and then Love Thy Neighbor, a relationship show that's focused on all kinds of relationship stuff. So actually, as I say this, you're going to be so sick of me, you can find me in so many places.
You can just Google her and she will pop up. You are a busy lady. My goodness.
I know. And I'm doing therapy. So if you happen to be in Florida, feel free. I'm not taking any clients till after the book launch because I'm already so full, but, feel free to reach out. Or if you need help finding a therapist in your area, I'm happy to give you some pointers on that too. So anyone, feel free to reach out to me, please, through my website.
Yes, amazing. Thank you, Colette, so much for being here. It's been really great getting to know you and to talk to you about all the things about The Cost of Quiet.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time. Thank you.